for the Palestinian Authority, another outrage from Israel as it moves forward with plans to build over 1,300 new homes in the West Bank, adding to previous projects already approved.
إن الإعلان عن 2862 وحدة استيطانية جديدة وشرعنة مستعمرتين جديدتين ووحدات استيطانية في قلب مدينة الخليل ما هو إلا عدوان صارخ على أرضنا.
The Palestinians have long sought the West Bank, along with Gaza and East Jerusalem, as part of their future state. Israel captured those areas during the 1967 war, and every government since then has continued settlement expansion. Some 475,000 Israeli Jews live in West Bank settlements, which have long been considered illegal by the international community. Ahead of the announcement, Israel's main backer, the United States, expressed its concern at warnings of the latest developments.
We believe it is critical for Israel and the Palestinian Authority to refrain from unilateral steps that exacerbate tension and undercut efforts to advance a negotiated two-state solution. This certainly includes settlement activity, as well as retroactive legalization of settlement outposts.
For Palestinian anti-settler groups, it demonstrates a continuation of old policies under Prime Minister Neftali Bennett's coalition government. Bennett, for his part, opposes Palestinian statehood and has already ruled out formal peace talks, preferring to focus on economic improvements.
Latest news, Israel to build 1,300 settlement units in occupied West Bank. Top Iranian official. If Israeli attacks, response will cause trillions in damage. Here's the latest news. Al Jazeera headliner. Israel to build 1,300 settlement units in occupied West Bank, dated October 24, 2021. Israel has announced plans to build more residences for Jewish settlers in the occupied West Bank, drawing immediate condemnation from Palestinian peace activists in neighboring Jordan. The announcement came on Sunday from the Ministry of Construction and Housing, and right-wing Prime Minister Neftali Bennett's government said tenders have been published for 1,355 homes in the occupied West Bank, which was seized by Israel during the 1967 Six-Day War. New settlement homes are to be built in 7 settlements, according to the statement from the Housing Ministry, add to the more than 2,000 settlement units that were announced last August. Housing Minister Zev Elkin, a member of the right-wing New Hope Party, said in a statement, strengthening Jewish presence in the West Bank are essential to the Zionist vision. The United Nations expressed its grave concern over Israel's announcement, stressing that all settlements are illegal. In a statement, United Nations envoy to the Middle East peace process, Tor Wensland, expressed concern over the announcement of the construction of the new settlement units. He also expressed his concern over the continuation of Israeli settlements expansion in the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem. I repeat that all settlements are illegal under international law, remain a major obstacle to peace, and must stop immediately, Wensland said. Palestinian Prime Minister Mohammed Shia, speaking at a weekly cabinet meeting, called on other nations, especially the United States, to confront Israel over the aggression that settlement construction poses for the Palestinian people. Palestinian Authority will be keenly watching for a response from U.S. President Joe Biden's administration, which has said it opposes unilateral Israeli settlement construction as an obstacle to a two-state solution to the conflict. On Friday, State Department spokesman Ned Price said the United States was concerned about the housing plans and called on Israel and the Palestinians to refrain from unilateral steps that exacerbate tension and undercut efforts to advance a negotiated two-state solution. About 475,000 Israeli Jews live in settlements in the occupied West Bank, which are considered illegal under international law. The European Union on Monday called on Israel to halt the planned construction. A spokesman for the Executive Commission of the European Union said in a statement, settlements are illegal under international law and constitute a major obstacle to the achievement of the two-state solution and a just, lasting, and a comprehensive peace plan between the parties. The European Union has consistently made clear that it will not recognize any changes to the pre-1967 borders other than those agreed by both sides, the spokesman said. Jordan condemned the announcement as a violation of international law. Jordanian Foreign Minister spokesman Haitham Abu al-Ful blasted settlement construction and general confiscation of Palestinian land as illegitimate. Anti-occupation group Peace Now said Sunday's announcement proved that Bennett's ideological diverse coalition, which replaced former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's pro-settlement government in June, was not a government of change. This government clearly continues Netanyahu's policy of de facto annexation, Peace Now said, calling on Bennett's left-wing governing parties, such as the Labor and Meretz parties, to wake up and demand the wild building in settlements cease immediately. Moishi Hellinger, a political scientist at Bar Ilan University, told AFP News Agency the right-wing factions in Bennett's 8-party coalition need to show their voters that they are defending their interests despite being in a coalition with the left. Preserving the coalition, which also includes an Islamist party, will require all sides to swallow snakes, he said. Bennett, the former head of a settler lobby group, opposes Palestinian statehood. He has ruled out formal peace talks with the Palestinian Authority during his tenure, saying he prefers to focus on economic improvements. Shortly after the settlement announcement, the Israeli Defense Minister said it will be issuing an additional 9,000 permits for Palestinians in the occupied West Bank to work in the Israeli construction industry. On top of those, the goal is to add another 6,000 permits shortly, it said. About 120,000 Palestinians currently have permits to work either in Israel or in settlements, generally earning for higher wages than equivalent work would pay in the occupied West Bank. Israeli settlement expansion in the occupied West Bank and annexed East Jerusalem has continued under every Israeli government since 1967. However, construction accelerated in the last few years under Netanyahu, with a significant boom during President Trump's U.S. administration, in which Palestinians accused of egregious pro-Israel bias. Times of Israel headliner, type Iran official. If Israel attacks, response will cause trillions of damage. One of Iran's most senior leaders threatened on Sunday that if Israel attacked its nuclear program, Tehran's response would require the Jewish state to spend tens of thousands of billions to reconstruct the country. Tweeting in English, Hebrew, Arabic, and Persian, Ali Shamkhani, the secretary of the Supreme National Security Council of Iran, commented on reports last week that Israel has approved a budget of some $5 billion, or $1.5 billion in U.S. money, to be used to prepare the military for a potential strike against Iran's nuclear program. Stating in English, instead of allocating $1.5 million budget for atrocities against Iran, the Zionist regime should focus on providing tens of thousands of billion dollars funding to repair the damage that is going to be caused by Iran's shocking response. Defense Minister Benny Gantz appeared before the Knet's powerful Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee on Tuesday to justify the government's requested budget increase for the military, warning that the additional funds are necessary in order to prepare for a potential strike on Iran's nuclear program. Gantz's appearance came a day after television reports said the government's plan to allocate $5 billion, or $1.5 billion in American aid, for such an attack on Iran, with $620 million of that coming from the 2022 defense budget and the rest coming from the current budget. This summer, the government announced that it had agreed on a $17.5 billion defense budget in 2022, an increase from the previous defense budget, which was set in 2019 and has remained in force as the government since then failed to pass a new one. Also on Tuesday, Finance Minister Avigdor Lieberman said a conflict with Iran was inevitable. and was the only way to stop the Islamic Republic from reaching nuclear capability. Speaking with the Walla news site, Lieberman said that a confrontation with Iran is not only a matter of time, not a lot of time. Mid efforts to resume talks between Tehran and world powers about renewing the 2015 nuclear deal, Lieberman said that no diplomatic process or agreement will stop Iran's nuclear program. According to the Israel Beteinu party chief, Iran is a bigger problem for Israel than the rest of the international community, because they have stated that their policy is destruction of Israel, and they mean it. U.S. President Joe Biden's administration has said that it was still seeking a joint U.S.-Iranian return to compliance with the nuclear deal, while acknowledging that it will not wait indefinitely for Tehran to return to the negotiating table. If it fails to do so, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken told his Israeli counterpart, Yair Lapid, earlier this month, that every option will be on the table. An apparent escalation in rhetoric after Biden told Bennett in August that Washington was willing to consider other options if the nuclear deal cannot be revived. What does this say about the state of Israel in itself at the current moment? Well, according to the status of settlements under international law, I will read you Article 49 of the 14th Geneva Convention, which states, quote, the occupying power shall not deport or transfer parts of its own civilian population into the territory it occupies. That means it also prohibits the individual or mass forcible transfers, as well as deportations of protected persons from occupied territory. And as the occupier, Israel is therefore forbidden from using state land and natural resources for purpose other than the military or security needs for the benefit of the local population. This is the repeated abuse of Israel in its own right, and why UN spokesmen over the past several years have come out, stated that, and stated fruitlessly because they know nothing's going to happen. Now with the United States acting as the big brother in the background, being silent when it comes to all this. And as well as the the sold out Arab republics who don't care about the Palestinian problem and have always used it as a moral springboard. Israel's building of these settlements in the West Bank, including in East Jerusalem, doesn't respect any of the rules and exceptions in the Fourth Geneva Convention. In addition to being violations of international humanitarian law, key acts required for the establishment of settlements around amount to war crimes under the Rome Statutes of the International Criminal Court. Now, Israel is not a part of the International Criminal Court, neither is the United States. Gee, I wonder why they continue to come away with these egregious human rights violations around the world, including war and crimes against humanity. Under this body of law, under the Rome Statutes, the extensive destruction and appropriation of property not justified by military necessity and carried out unlawfully and wantonly, the transfer directly or indirectly by the occupying power of parts of its own civilian population into the territory it occupies, or the deportation or transfer of all or parts of the population of the occupied territory within or outside this territory, constitute war crimes. And I'm reading it right from its own website. As stated above, pillage is also a war crime under the Rome Statutes. Namely, the two countries that have pillaged the most from the rest of the world, well, the United States and its coalition partners, and Israel, in regards to its own country and the expansion of its borders ever so slowly. So, is it time to question the relationship between the United States and Israel? Well, according to a professor at International Affairs at Harvard University, Stephen Walt, who also is the co-author of the Israeli Lobby, he says yes. In a write-up to Foreign Policy published on Thursday, it was Walt who said that Israel's moral support by the United States may have been justified in the past, considering the persecution of Jews by the Christian West. But the moral case for this support was compelling only if one ignores the consequences for the people who have been living in Palestine, over the last 100 years. Now, quote unquote, now this is funny because Israel is alleged to be the only democracy in the Middle East, but it pales in comparison to the liberal democracies in the United States, where people of all religions and races are allegedly to have equal rights, and they do on the face surface. But Israel continually and illegally raises land, Palestinian land, in the hopes that the Palestinians will either leave the host country and they don't have to deal with a two-state solution. And who cares what the Rome Statutes say? They're not a part of the Rome Statutes. And the United States is not going to say anything because AIPAC controls their Congress. I guess it could be argued that during the Cold War days, Israel was a strategic U.S. partner. And this is something that is written in the book, The Israeli Lobby by Walt and Mearsheimer. But today, unconditional support for Israel causes a hell of a lot more problems for the United States than it solves. And one only has to look at the foreign policy reports written in the 1980s and the neocons policies, which coincide with Zionist policies, such as the clean break document and the Paul Wolfowitz document, which later became the Bush doctrine as well after 9/11, which coincides with the Project for New American Century when it comes to the United States military domination and destabilization of Arab states. Well, that was what the clean break document called regarding Israel and how to form relationships with certain countries to alienate other Arab countries and have them set against each other in the hopes of controlling the region. I would say that they succeeded in that regard to some extent. And that's all for the news. See you next time.